Well, hello there. Welcome back to Carl and Rick Talk Risk. Hello, Rick. How are you?
Oh, unbelievable, man. I'd tell you the truth, but you get jealous. So,
Rick, one day I'm going to mix up Rick and Risk, and it's going to be Carl and Risk Talk Rick. I just
well,
have that fear in me.
actually, early in my career, um, it was during the whole Nick Gleason scandal. For those of you who are of a certain age can appreciate this, and so a lot of people were mixing my name up with Nick Gleason, and when I pick up the phone, go Rick Nason speaking. You can always hear, "Oh, I thought you were in jail." No.
Yeah, that's not an association you want in risk management.
Actually, he's a great guy. Okay,
Oh,
anyhow,
interesting.
that's the story for another time.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, first of all, please, if you're enjoying the channel, and I'm hearing from some of you, so somebody's watching, click subscribe, click like, comment on the videos. We're interested to hear your thoughts. Um, for this week, we want to touch on something that happened just yesterday. As you can tell, I'm in my Saturday informal wear. Yesterday,
As you
I
can
was,
tell, I'm in the only shirt I own.
yeah, exactly. um, Yesterday, I was part of the judging panel for the PRMIA, which is a risk management non-profit association. I was part of their risk management case competition, which is back in person for the first time in a couple of years, and online, following a hybrid approach. And it brings together students from quite literally everywhere in the world. I mean, Egypt, Hungary, New York, Toronto. Yeah, lots of teams. Very competitive. And yeah, so I was able to watch these presentations and listen to their thoughts on SVB, Silicon Valley Bank. And also there was a few questions on Credit Suisse, but most of the focus was on SVB. And Rick, what I found interesting about their presentations, I mean, they were polished, first of all. Students these days can really present well. But what I found interesting is their solutions um, asked for the regulator to step up. The regulator didn't do enough. The regulator didn't clamp down early enough. It didn't put enough governance around these institutions. And I'm thinking back to some of our conversations about that balance between, enhanced risk management that takes responsibility for what it's doing, and the regulator, which is, bullying it into doing what it wants. And I think, they're not yet in the industry yet, so obviously cut them some slack. But I'll kick it over to you. What's wrong with their solution? What's wrong with asking the regulator to step up? Increase the headcount, increase oversight of these banks. Wouldn't that fix the problem?
Oh boy, holy smokes! Like we generally try to keep these to 15 minutes. Do you really want me to go on a political rant about the regulator? Um, but first and foremost, I'm not an expert on what happened at SVB whatsoever. So
Yeah.
I a lot of what I say might be totally wrong. Secondly, in specifically in the case of SVB, to the best of my knowledge, they never stepped outside of any of the regulations. To the best of my knowledge, they were 100% regulatory compliance. Again, I could be wrong there. The issue with the regulators is first off, there's twofold. One, there's the larger political theory issue of, how much government oversight do you want to have? Okay. And while I'm not 100% libertarian, in the interest of full disclosure, let's put it this way: I lean more that way than I do towards full on Bernie Sanders approach. Um, Regulators have very, very, very different incentives than corporations do, or as a subset of corporations, financial institutions. And regulators are solely to prevent things from hitting the news. Secondly, to protect consumers. But objective number one is to make sure that the finger's not pointed at them. Notice that no one points fingers at anyone if someone misses out on an opportunity. So as to not get myself in trouble, there are certain countries where the regulators tend to be slightly more conservative, and the financial institutions tend to be, in my opinion, way more conservative. And because of that, you don't have as many blow-ups, or the blow-ups are not as volatile. But also, to be quite frank, it means that people are living a lower standard of living than they otherwise could have if they were in different regulatory regimes. Now, no one points at fingers at anyone, says that, you're living in a 30% smaller house or driving a 30% lower quality car than you would otherwise under a more liberal regulatory regime, or a more liberal, less conservative financial institution mantra.
Just to make sure I'm understanding, with less regulation, you're giving financial institutions more freedom to compete, and therefore that competition is good for the end consumer, right?
Exactly. Okay. And obviously only those institutions that are the corporate form of a psychopath are going to take extreme advantage of that. Are they going to push the envelope a little bit more? Sure.
Yeah.
But I think everyone who is in charge of a major financial institution understands the potential to go bankrupt. They understand the importance of the service that they're providing. They understand that and appreciate that having that service no longer be provided is disastrous, not only to them personally, but I do believe, contrary to the popular myth, that the vast majority of business people are not evil psychopaths. But the story of the evil psychopath, that sells. Okay. Just look at what's happening to SBF, and the media frenzy that caused. And that's just only the exceptional story. So I believe, philosophically, sorry, this is getting way too long-winded. Philosophically, I believe that senior managers and most business leaders are intelligent enough, and they will not get big enough to be systematically important if left to their own devices. Ironically, I will also argue that when we rely on regulation, then the self-control barriers are totally off. Okay. And I argued very clearly in many other places in 2008, actually pre-2008 as well, that 2008 was caused by regulation. Okay. I firmly 100% believe that, albeit in different ways. That because here's the thing. If you're a teenager and your parents tell you that the boundary is X, okay, you might only be, or boundary is X, let's do it this way, you might actually only be comfortable going to here. And so you're only going to go to here. But if your parents tell you that the boundary is X, guess what? You're going to go to there, or you're going to go to the boundary. And that's clearly what happened. There's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff that they didn't understand. And here I'm kind of taking out of context, but they did because, regulatory wise, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
And, if you know that the fireman is going to be there to protect you from getting burned, okay, you get closer to the fire than you normally would.
No, that's exactly right. And I've been more involved in my career reporting metrics which the regulator's interested in, starting up fire drills that the regulator wants to see. And what tends to happen is that that's a microscope that the whole risk management team uses, is like, oh well, that's all that matters. And you're not looking anywhere else at the risks that are emerging. And also caught up in that is and one of the teams mentioned recency bias. That comes into effect too, because it's, regulators are putting out the last fire that happened, whereas you really want, and I think regulators are trying to do this with the risk culture focus at the moment. They really want companies understanding their risks well enough that they can prevent them, or not prevent them, but have a good understanding of them and have controls around them, and so on. But yeah, too much regulation, it takes the focus off understanding your own business, and that's a problem for sure.
There's sorry to jump in, but there's an interesting analogy, and the Canadian Association of Pediatricians has now released a second report, and I wrote about this in one of my earlier books about 8 years ago. And the report is basically stop bubble wrapping our kids.
Yeah.
Okay. And the point is unless we allow our kids to get scrapes and bruises, I engage in quote unquote what they call risky play. Now, yes, you want to prevent the kids from, what happens if I drop, 100-ton weight on my head? Here, let's drop this weight on my skull. You want to prevent stupidity.
Yeah.
But you got to let your kids get scrapes and bruises and learn where the limits are themselves, because otherwise they don't build the risk intelligence to behave appropriately. Also, they miss out on a lot of experience. And I believe that there's kind of the equivalent when it comes to risk management. When you over-govern risk management, organizations miss out on the learning of what can burn me, what can cause a serious injury, what will really hurt. But they also miss out on the joy of discovery, the upsides of risk. We always have to remember risk is two-sided. Risk is a possibility that bad or good things may happen in the future.
Yeah. And I think that's the perspective students will gain once they get in the workforce, that, risk is it's not just about the downside. It's not just about the regulators stepping in.
I'm going to harp on the risk industry, because regulatory risk has become such a big thing in financial institutions. To be quite frank, we have an entire generation of risk analysts who have never had accountability for risk decision. All the risk decisions have been made through regulation. Is this below or close to the regulatory number? Let's take investment banks. Okay, investment banking partners, it was their money. Okay, if a deal goes south, their wealth goes south. Guess what? To steal from Taleb, it's all skin in the game. And what regulation does is it takes away skin in the game. So we've got an entire generation of risk analysts who've never had skin in the game.
Yeah. I'm actually one of them. So I'm trying to fix that by talking to people like you. But yeah, it's a problem.
I think you just called me old, folks, but
hey, not in those words, Rick. I want to come back on something that I tried to prod the students with a few times, and it goes to 2008 a little bit. I asked the question, did the regulator really prevent a systemic crisis from breaking out in this case, or would this company, would its investors have pulled out? Would it have shrunk to a reasonable size all by itself? So I'm kind of asking the question, how connected was it? Like, was it really a systemic threat that the regulator had to step in at all? It was interesting to hear some of their responses, because it makes them question the regulator's role a bit. Yeah.
That's a great question. How'd they respond? What did you think was the best response?
I like the team from Hungary on that note. I think they sort of gave one response and then thought it through a little bit and then came in with a better response. And yeah, they picked up.
Sign of wisdom.
Yes, yeah. No, they thought well on the spot. They picked up on, how do you distinguish between a systemic risk and an idiosyncratic, something that is because it's also interesting because all the presentations were about how concentrated SVB was. Hey, all their depositors are healthcare startups and fintechs, and that's great. But if they're so concentrated and they're lending in the same community where they're not widespread. They're not heavily involved in the derivatives market. All they invested in was long dated treasuries. That was part of the problem. I would argue if they're so concentrated, they're not really a systemic risk. I'm sure somebody could push back on that. I'm happy
Well,
to.
I think Campbell Soup ought to start manufacturing batteries. In other words, let's think of a company. Companies become great by being concentrated. Stick to your knitting.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, it's a whole fox versus the hedgehog thing.
Yeah.
And we've kind of got to, diversification is great as a risk tool for managing downsides, but it doesn't always lead to the greatest of efficiencies.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, and it goes to what you were just saying about understanding the business. What's the business trying to do? Because that's what SVB was trying to do. It was trying to be concentrated and benefit from the pandemic and all the new businesses and new opportunities that brought in their doors. So yeah. Well, Rick, we plan to get on to other stuff in this conversation, like the career panel. I think maybe we should leave that to next time because there were some interesting questions from students, and it was a short panel. So I hope we can touch on some of that stuff. But folks, you'll have to come back next week for that one. I'm sorry. Anyway, Rick, good chatting with you.
Always fun.